Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply, and this is the Leather Element. If you've got a good question for us or a good idea for a leather element, drop it in the comment box below. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So belt tricks part 2. We're going to step it up a little bit. We're going to talk about adding a taper. To me, a very clean, classic, professional look for a belt. But also, a taper, it's going to go to a lot of different projects, well beyond a belt. Secondly, let's add that liner. It's a very utility step. It's a nice touch. But that creates an unbelievable amount of creative possibilities. One of my favorite techniques in leathercraft, and we'll talk about that. Well, if we line, we need to sew. So let's look at some simple tricks and tips for hand sewing a belt. Very easy to do. Okay, so let's step back behind the table, cut a taper. The biggest reason we want to use a taper is to take a larger strap and drop that down to a smaller strap, usually for hardware. Here's the perfect example. This is the shoulder strap from our briefcase video. We've got a taper on that. Looks really good. If we did not add a taper, I'm going to have to add a piece of hardware so big that it's going to look out of place on the project. So let's just drop in a taper. Very professional look. Now, on a belt, I love the tapered look on a belt. I like the smaller buckle. To me, very symmetrical. We can always go with a larger buckle. Now, we don't have to go Western. This is just what I have in my shop. But this is the 1.5 inch buckle. Same thing. But right there, to me, that's just too much buckle for that belt. Now, on the fashion side, that's going to look good. Or say right here, with a gun belt. Now we've got a much larger body behind that. That doesn't look out of proportion at all. In fact, that looks great. So for a belt, we can always taper this down to add our hardware. One last point, and we've seen this project. We did a video on this. We can cut our flap simply as the design, or if we're going to slide that in, say through a strap. So there's a number of places we can use a taper. It's very easy to do. So I'm going to reset here. Let's mark for our taper. I've got my blank cut to length. So back to part 1. I'm going to take my waist size, 35 inches, and I'm going to add 9.5 inches. So 44.5 inches on my blank length. So let's do this. All we have to do, let's butt to one end. I'm going to mark for my rivet holes. And then let's butt to the other end and mark for our size holes. Good. Now our belt is basically sized. But let's see how this works. Let's see how well this works. So I want 35 inches on my second hole. Good. There we go. Right into the middle of my oblong. I'm going to bend back right there. This is going to be a perfect fit. So this system, super easy, works very well. Now when we're going to taper, I've got 2 ends on this and I'll explain this. So on this end it says buckle. Yeah, there we go. What I want is a good 1.5 inches or maybe 3.8 centimeters from my last hole to the end of my taper. Because if this hole is too close, my buckle is never going to climb up to that wider strap. So I'll lose that hole. So let's give that a little extra room between last hole and the end of my taper. Now on this end, this just says strap. Because like our briefcase strap, I'm not using a buckle here. I'm just going to bend this back. We've got a D, an O, or a square. So distance there isn't it a big issue. But right there, that's 1 inch. Okay, so back over here, I'm going to drop a red line in exactly between the two. So therefore, that's going to be my mark. Now, that's our tongue end, but it'll work on either end because it's the same distance. So let's come in. I'm going to drop this hole right on my innermost hole. Let's mark that on both sides of our red line. Let's do the same thing on the other end, innermost hole. And we've got our marks. Okay, camera's probably not going to pick that up, but you'll see where we're going with this. So let's take our square. We're going from a 1.5 inch to a 1 inch. So I need to drop 1/4 of an inch from either side. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can always use our wooden strap cutter. I'm going to come into 1 1/4 inch. So I'll drop off 1/4 inch there, but I'm not going to trim that off yet. I'll flip this over. To me, it's easier to straddle the whole strap as opposed to try to get 1/4 of an inch off of our side. But let's go with a knife. In fact, on this, if you buy one of these, It literally will be your best purchase. You will use this on almost every project. Okay, so I've got my mark here. I'm going to drop my square in and I'm going to cut from that mark out. Now I could always measure 1/4 inch in, but that's easy enough to see that that's parallel. So let's cut from that mark out. Good. Now on this other side, we can do the same thing, but now I can't see my edge. So let's flip that around, and an easy way to do this. Again, I can see that mark, but let's make sure we can see it. So I'm going to drop the very end of my square right on that mark. So now I know exactly where to stop my cut. Good. Well, that looks nice, even. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. Well, that looks good. Okay, let's step over to our punch table. We're going to use an English point to clip these off. It's going to be very symmetrical. We're going to use an English point or a belt tip punch. That's going to give us a very smooth transition from the smaller to the wider strap. Now, we can cut these by hand, absolutely. And we can use a round end punch. But what we want to avoid there is notice how sharp the shoulders are on that. As this moves through our pants, those are going to catch on every belt loop, and it's going to be very frustrating. So let's give that more of a smooth transition. I'm going to use a 1-inch English punch. Now, we can go with multiple sizes here. I just like this size for my tapers. Now, if you'll notice on the inside, I've got a line on both sides marked about 2/3 in. Here's how this works. So I'm going to spread that cut open. I'm going to put the very tip of that punch right into that cut, and then I'm going to scoot this over to where that blue line is right on the edge of my leather. Can we see that? Yeah, there we go. So let's punch that. Good. How clean and even is that? So let's do that on the other side. There we go. Now, if it doesn't separate, we've got just a little bit of leather there. We can trim that off. Good. Well, look how even and clean that is. Just what we're looking for. I'm going to do the other end the same way. Okay, and again, symmetrical and balanced. Just what we're looking for. Okay, I'm going to add some decoration to this. We're going to come back around to that. We're going to talk about that. But our next step, let's line our belt. I'm going to do my best not to roll here because there is so much to say about adding a liner. So many reasons we want to. But basically, we're going to take a very utility step and turn it into a very creative step. Right off the bat, we don't have to add a liner. If we've got a good 8 to 9 ounce, a good standard belt weight, all we need to do is knock some hardware onto that. We've got a beautiful, durable belt. But here's a great example. Say we find a beautiful leather. We fall in love with it, want to make a belt, but it's simply too thin to make a belt. All we have to do is drop in another leather behind that, and we'll talk about weights here in a minute. But let's drop in another leather behind that. Now I've got that beautiful top grain out. I also have a top grain in, but now I've got some good body and a good weight. That's going to make a good belt. Now the reason I said top grain in, I love suede, love to line with suede, but it's got grip. That's why saddle seats are made with suede. Or say a mouse pad, it's got some grip to it. So it's not going to slide in and out of our belt loops easily. Not a deal breaker, it will. It's just not as smooth as a top grain. So a lot of the major belt makers will come in behind their belt with a natural undyed veg tan. So first off, undyed. We're not going to have to worry about rub off. But secondly, with a veg tan, we've got multiple weights, so we can determine our outcome. Now, here's what I mean by that. On this belt, in fact, this is the same design as this. This is 3-ply. So I've got a 4 to 5. The white is our deer tan cow and white. That's a 2 to 3. Right back here, I've got a 2 to 3 ounce veg tan. So we're kind of up into about the 10 ounce range. I don't want to go much higher than that. In fact, as we stack, what can happen? That's a big keeper. But with 3-ply here, 3-ply here, if they're overweight, my leather's not going to go through my keeper. I've done that. That's why I want to bring that up. But with that in mind, so if I drop in a suede, that's a 3 to 4, and we've got a 4 to 5. Okay, that gets us up there. But again, I've got that suede behind me. So let's do this. Let's add one more ply. And this is the perfect route. This is our pig liner. It's a pig skin. But this is about 1.5 ounce. So this is going to add virtually no weight to a belt. So with this, if I go with a 4 to 5, 2 to 3, and then a 1 to 2, that gets me almost right at 10 ounce. That's going to be a good, durable belt, but also it's a belt that's going to soften up and it's going to wear well. Now, I've got a big decision. Before our next scene, I'm going to have to pick a color to drop in behind this. I love our turquoise suede. Very Southwestern. Love the electric blue, but right there, if we want to add a bit of a feminine touch, these are just some of the gorgeous suedes we have. But just about any leather will back any leather. So what I'll do is I'm going to pick a design or pick a leather. I'm going to drop that in because our next step, let's talk about some tricks and tips when we sew our belt. We're not going to stay here long, but it's a couple of valid points and some notes. So first off, I chose not to go with my pig. I've gone with a natural veg tan. The great thing here, we've got so many weights available. We can really calculate our final weight with our natural veg. But also on the pig, we need to be careful there. If we add too much glue, it could bring a little bit of staining through. The glue won't come through, but we'll get a little darkening. Secondly, colors. I've gone with our suede, that beautiful rust, very rich color. But what I didn't want to happen is I'm going to have a white stitch line. I'm going to have some antique nickel spots. Our brown here, if I added a different color, I felt like it was just going to be too much. I want more of a subdued look here. And last, on our back, I'm not going to add a groove line. It's hard to hit. So therefore, if we have a groove line, a chisel line, and then our edge, to me that looks very unprofessional. But if we don't add a groove line, all we see is our stitch line, and it looks pretty clean and tight. Also, last point, I promise, I'm going to take a dauber very lightly with a very small amount of dye in it. That's what I'm trying to say. And I'm going to run that down my edge so that we have a consistent color on our edge. What I'll do then is bevel my back. To me, there's nothing worse than having dye or antique dripped across the back of a belt. To me, that's very unprofessional. Now, what I would like to do, we're going through 9 ounces of leather here. In fact, let me mention that. I've got a 2 to 3, a 3 to 4 suede, and a 4 to 5 natural veg. That comes out to a 9 to 12 ounce belt. Well, when we weigh this out with my gauge, it's actually about 10.5 ounces. That's a little bit heavy, but it's a good sturdy belt. It's going to last forever. So with my chisel, where I'm going with that is with my 6 tines, I can get through it. The problem is getting my chisel back out. That's a lot of metal going through that thickness of leather. So what I'm probably going to do is back off to my 4. Now with this, the point I want to make here is I would love to be able to get that chisel, there we go, straight up and down each and every time. It's not going to happen. So let's err in our favor. So what I want to do is let's lean that out just a little bit. So therefore, I'm not running the risk. If we lean in, we run the risk of coming out of the side of our leather. That's our worst case. Or if our chisel is so close to that edge, first off, it's going to look terrible. But secondly, it's not going to be a solid stitch line. So what I'd like to do is when we drop in our chisel, let's lean out just a little bit. Now I can feel tines across. Good. Now let's do a second. First tine, last hole. There we go. My stitch line is going to be straight all the way down. So I'm going to chisel both sides of this, then we'll jump over and start sewing. If we're going to line our belt, we need to drop in a stitch line. Glue's great, it's going to hold, but we need a stitch line. But the real reason behind putting a stitch on the edge of a belt is for strength and for stretch. So overall, durability. But again, we could take a utility step, turn it into a very creative step. We've got some gorgeous colors of hand sewing thread. So therefore, we can add yet another level of decoration here. I just like that very bright white. It's a good clean look to me. Now, on a belt, we've got almost 4 feet here. So typically I want to go 3.5 times my length, but that would be 16 feet of thread. We can do it, but if we start in the center and work out on all 4 sides, much easier. Plus, we can draw up on our thread. Notice how much I've got past my needle. So therefore, as I sew, I can pay out thread as I go. And I still have enough leader on there to trim off whatever threads picked up some dye. So let's start right here. I'm going to start just anywhere in the middle, because when we come in from our other side, we'll start in that same hole, work in the other direction. We'll never see that. So let's even that out. Good. Now, saddler stitch on this. So one needle in the front side, one from the back. Let's make our X and pull that through. There we go. We've got a good stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew to the end on this side, same on the other side, because there's something here that if we're new at sewing a belt, it's going to freak us out. It works itself out, but you'll see what I mean. Nice. Now, unlike most projects, a belt does not allow us a lot of place to hide our knot. So really all I'm going to do is tie a square knot on the back, and I'm going to bring both ends of the thread back through separate holes, trim that off. So that's easy enough. But secondly, notice too, we chiseled through leather that we pre-dyed. We've got no problem there. No naked leather. But also, right here, we're wasting a little bit of thread. There we go. But there's all that color. Notice that's picked up some color moving through the belt. So now I've got a nice pretty white. We'll hammer this down, get a better look at it. But here's the entire point of this. Say we sew our belt, and now we've got this big curved belt. My first thought is, oh no, I've ruined a belt. No, just sew the other side, and it's going to come right back to straight. Now, this can be a little tedious, hand sewing. Well, yes and no. We can sew about 2.5 inches a minute. So a 45-inch piece, about 20 minutes, give or take. So it's not really bad, but the point is, we don't need a sewing machine to put in an absolutely beautiful stitch line. So I'm going to sew the other side, then we'll hammer this down, get a good look at it. And our belt is sewn. But let's take a look. Yes, we are back to straight now. That's what we're looking for. Now we've got some knots back here. We're going to hammer down our stitch line. Those will, for the most part, disappear. But all told, we've got a beautiful stitch line. And you know what? If somebody notices a knot, hallmark of handmade, absolutely. Now our next step, we're going to hammer down our stitch line. That really works on all projects. In fact, any stitched edge. But let's do it on this just to get a final look at this belt. When I say hammer, actually what I mean is we're going to tap down our stitch line. It's going to close our holes down, sink our thread down into our groove line, and it's going to spread that thread out, give us a little bit more color. I love a tack hammer, but if we don't have one, we can always go with our mallet. Now right here, that's the area where I strike my tools. But right here, very clean. So let's reach across our project. Now let's don't hit this hard enough to where we damage the leather. But notice, very nice difference. Looks very clean, consistent. Not so much over here. So I'm going to hammer down the balance of this. We'll take a look. Well, that looks fantastic. We do not have to have a sewing machine to put in a beautiful stitch line. We can now set a taper. Nothing difficult. But isn't that clean, professional, and very consistent? On our liner, we're taking a basic step and turning that into something spectacular. We'll talk more about that. But also, we can put in a beautiful, clean stitch line on our kitchen table or our coffee table. To us crafters, that's a big help. So, part 3. Let's knock a keeper and a buckle into this. We'll drop in that frustrating little tip. We'll see a good way to do that. But also, my favorite, we're going to talk about some decoration because we can do just about anything to a belt. All right, so I hope this is good information for you. Thanks for taking time to watch The Leather Element. Good luck with your projects.